Okay, so you're getting ready for this conference and you sent over some really fascinating stuff about networking. And honestly, I think it's a topic that we all need to kind of brush up on every now and then.
Absolutely. And especially with conferences, there's so much going on that it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I think it's great that you're thinking ahead and really trying to strategize a bit.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we want to do in this deep dive today.
Hmm.
Is like we're going to go through all this material and hopefully give you some actionable steps so you can make the most of this conference.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So I guess the best place to start is kind of with your goals for the conference. Like, what are you hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, that's the most important thing, I think, is going in knowing what you want to achieve.
Right.
Um, so, you want to have some idea of who are the people you want to connect with. Is it someone in a specific industry, a specific role? Maybe you're looking to connect with folks from a certain company. And also, what are you hoping to get out of that interaction? Are you looking for, just to meet someone new that you can stay in touch with? Are you hoping to, find some kind of collaboration or partnership? Are you looking to learn something specific?
Right.
So it's helpful to kind of really articulate those goals and maybe even make a list and then prioritize like who are the top 3 people that you really want to connect with.
Right.
And then within that, you were talking about self-reflection in your materials, which I think is a really important point. It's not just about identifying these individuals, but then also thinking, okay, what is it specifically that I want to learn from them? Or what kind of partnership am I potentially looking for and how I'm going to approach that?
Yeah, and so how do you actually make those connections?
Well, that's where the preparation comes in. So once you've identified who you want to talk to, you mentioned doing your research beforehand.
Yeah.
And I think that's key. Spend some time on the conference website, look at the attendee list, look at the speaker list, see who's going to be there.
Right.
And then, use those amazing tools like LinkedIn and company websites. Oh, yeah. To actually do a little bit of digging into these people.
Ah.
Find out what they're working on, what they're interested in, and that gives you a starting point for a conversation.
So once you've done your research, you've got your kind of hit list of people you want to talk to.
Yeah.
How about like the actual logistics, like blocking off time? I mean, does that really work?
I think it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
When you're at a conference, there's so much going on, presentations, workshops, social events. It's easy to just get caught up in everything.
Right.
So I think blocking off even just 30 minutes or an hour in your schedule and saying, okay, this is dedicated networking time.
Yeah.
It makes you more intentional about it.
Yeah.
And I think it also helps you prioritize that because, sometimes networking can feel like, oh, it's just something extra. I'll do it if I have time.
Right.
But if you actually put it in your calendar, it becomes a priority.
So you've got that networking time blocked off. What about things like business cards? Are those still a thing or is it all about LinkedIn now?
It's a good question. I think LinkedIn is definitely essential. So make sure your profile's up to date. It has a professional photo.
Yeah.
It really represents who you are now and the kind of work you're doing. But I do still think business cards have their place.
Yeah.
Some people still prefer them.
Right.
So it's not a bad idea to have a few on hand just in case. And also just the practical stuff you mentioned, checking out the location beforehand, figuring out the transportation.
Yeah.
Maybe even looking at the hotel amenities if you're staying there, all those little logistical things.
Yeah.
Just so that you're not stressed out about that when you're actually at the conference.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And actually, one more thing I want to touch on that was in your materials was about brushing up on your English skills.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Specifically industry vocabulary and networking phrases.
Yeah, even if English is your first language or you're very comfortable with it, I think it's helpful to, immerse yourself in a little bit of the language that's specific to your industry and your field. Maybe listen to some podcasts or some interviews that are related to your field, just to kind of get your ear tuned to the kind of vocabulary and the phrases that people are using.
So I think it's really important to get your elevator pitch down.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Your elevator pitch is crucial.
Like so many people just sort of launch into this long rambling thing. And I'm just like thinking, okay, just get to the point.
Yeah, it's got to be concise and it's got to be engaging. So aim for that sort of 30 to 60 second sweet spot.
Okay.
You want to be able to quickly and clearly articulate who you are, what you do, and what value you bring.
Yeah, and I think it helps to kind of think about it in terms of like what problem do you solve or what need do you fulfill for people?
Exactly.
Because then they can instantly see, oh, this person can help me with this.
Right. And it's also good to have, maybe 2 or 3 versions of your elevator pitch tailored to different audiences.
Yeah.
So if you're talking to someone in a specific industry, you can kind of tweak it to be more relevant to them. And then the other thing is just practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
Say it out loud, get comfortable with it so that when you're actually in that situation, it doesn't sound rehearsed. It sounds natural.
Right.
And the other thing I'll say is that it's not about selling.
Mm-hmm.
It's about sparking curiosity and establishing rapport.
Right.
You don't want to come across as like, hey, buy my product or hire me for this. It's more about like, hey, this is what I do. This is what I'm passionate about. Would love to connect and learn more about you.
So you've got your elevator pitch down pat. You're at the conference. How do you break the ice with somebody?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? So, a lot of people get nervous about that, but there's some pretty easy ways to break the ice. Your materials mentioned some conference-specific conversation starters.
Yeah.
Like, hey, that was a really interesting session. What did you think about it? Or what's been your biggest takeaway from the conference so far? You can also just make a general observation about the conference or the location. You're like, wow, this is a beautiful city, or I've never been to this part of the country before.
Right.
The important thing is to just be genuine and be interested in the other person.
Yeah.
And, try to avoid anything too controversial like politics or religion.
Right.
Especially at a professional event.
And also have like a couple of open-ended questions in your back pocket, that can kind of keep the conversation going.
Because you don't want to just ask a yes or no question and then have the conversation fizzle out.
Right.
So you want to have something that you can kind of follow up with and really get to know the person a little bit.
Yeah. So what about once you're in a conversation, what are some things to keep in mind?
Well, first of all, be open and approachable.
Right.
Smile, make eye contact, have open body language.
Yeah.
Be the kind of person that people want to talk to.
Yeah.
And also be mindful of the setting.
Yeah.
If you're at a coffee break or a reception,
Right.
it's a more informal setting, so you can be a little bit more relaxed and casual.
Yeah.
But if you're, approaching someone during a session or a workshop, be respectful of their time and maybe just keep it brief.
Right.
Don't interrupt a presentation or anything like that.
And it's not just about talking at people, right?
Yeah,
It's about
it's a dialogue.
it's a two-way street.
Yeah, you want to be genuinely interested in what the other person has to say. Ask them questions. Actively listen. Find some common ground.
Yeah.
Make them feel like you're actually engaged in the conversation and not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Right.
And, little tip, remember people's names?
Oh, yeah.
That makes a huge difference. When you can address someone by their name, it shows that you're paying attention and that you're interested in them as an individual.
Right.
And also a sincere compliment can go a long way.
Yeah.
If you genuinely admire something about someone's work or their achievements, let them know.
Right. But only if it's genuine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to just throw out compliments randomly.
Right.
It's got to be authentic and also be mindful of, personal compliments. You don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I would stick to complimenting people on their professional achievements or their skills.
And, there are times when a conversation is just not really going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Sometimes you just don't click with someone, and that's okay.
Right.
You don't have to force it.
Yeah.
And it's also be mindful of people's time. If you see that someone is looking around or checking their phone or, they're just not really engaged in the conversation, it's okay to gracefully exit.
Yeah.
You can say something like, it was great meeting you. I'm going to go grab another coffee or I'm going to check out that session over there.
Right.
And, if you feel like there is a connection and you want to stay in touch,
Yeah.
this is a good time to offer your business card or suggest connecting on LinkedIn.
So the conference is over. You've made some connections now. What?
The follow-up is so important.
Yeah.
A lot of people go to conferences, they collect business cards, they make these connections, and then nothing happens.
Right.
The real magic happens after the conference when you actually follow up with these people.
Right.
So within, a day or two, ideally send a personalized email or a LinkedIn message.
Right.
Remind them where you met, mention something specific that you talked about, and then suggest a next step.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a virtual coffee, maybe it's sharing an article that you think they would be interested in, but have some kind of call to action so that you can continue the conversation.
And think of it as an ongoing process, right?
Absolutely. Networking is not a one-time thing. It's about building relationships over time.
Yeah.
So stay in touch with people, comment on their LinkedIn posts, share articles with them, just keep that conversation going.
So after the conference is over, you've done your follow-up.
Yeah.
One thing that your materials mentioned was self-reflection, just kind of taking stock of how did it go?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable exercise.
Yeah.
Take some time to reflect on the conference and ask yourself, did I achieve my goals?
Right.
Who did I connect with that I was hoping to connect with? What could I have done differently? Was my elevator pitch effective? Was I
Yeah.
able to break the ice easily?
Right.
Was my English good enough? Were there any unexpected situations that I wasn't prepared for? And how can I be better prepared next time?
And I guess the big takeaway from all this is just to be prepared.
Yeah. The more prepared you are, the more confident you'll be.
Right.
The more you'll get out of the conference.
Yeah.
So do your research practice,
Yeah.
your elevator pitch,
Yeah.
think about your goals, and just go in there with a positive attitude and be ready to connect with people.
And, think about one person you want to connect with
Yeah,
and how you can bring value to them.
exactly.
That's our deep dive for today.
Great talking to you.
Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
See ya.
Bye.